Hello hunters, welcome back to Superfan Natural. Guys, I've seen a lot of terrifying stuff in my 30-odd years of life, and one of the things that skeeves me out more than anything else is the concept of bodily possession. The idea of some other being just crawling inside you and taking complete control of your body while you're helpless? Terrifying. That's absolutely horrible. In the world of Supernatural, possession is not only a real thing, it's really, really common. In fact, according to a study I just made up, 1 in 5 people is possessed at any given time. Despite being more common than the cold, it's important to remember that not all possessions work the same way. After all, there's a variety of body snatchers in the show, and they all have their own little quirks. In this video, I'll list, compare, and contrast most, if not all, of the different things that can jump into your body if you're ever unfortunate enough to find yourself blue skidooed into the supernatural universe. Before we get into it, I want to lay out a few characteristics that are present in most, if not all, forms of possession. Unless I say otherwise, assume that anytime something jumps into a person's body, it suppresses the host's consciousness and makes their body superhumanly strong and kind of immortal. It no longer needs food, water, sleep, or even air, and while it may or may not be more durable, fatal wounds usually aren't going to kill the thing inside or even stop the possession. Most creatures have specific weaknesses that are specific to their species, and I'm not really going to go into those unless they relate directly to possession. We'll start with the most common form of possession, demonic possession. On Earth, demons manifest as clouds of black smoke, and they take over a person's body by flying into their mouth. Usually. We do see a couple of weird exceptions. The first time we see demonic possession, the demon actually enters the meat suit through the eyes. We never see this again, so I just chalk it up to early series weirdness. In the season 1 finale, we see a couple of demons take over people invisibly. Like, there's no smoke or anything, people just gasp and bam, black eyes. This could also be early season weirdness, except we see Ruby do it again in season 4. The most likely explanation is that the actual possession happened earlier off-screen, and the demons just waited to take over, but I also like to think it's possible that they somehow sneakily got in through another orifice. Anyway, demons can take over anyone who isn't protected by a charm or tattoo or spell. When they enter a body, they don't just take over the brain. Instead, they inhabit every cell and system. Though it's important to note that those systems don't need to be working, as demons are able to possess vessels that are mortally wounded, brain dead, or even just dead. It's not clear if there's any amount of damage that would force a demon to vacate a body. The closest thing we get to that would probably be Abaddon smoking out when her vessel was immolated with holy fire, but even that seemed voluntary. Mostly, I just want to know what would happen if you tossed one into a wood chipper. They never addressed that, despite it clearly being a question that everyone was asking. It is possible for a host to regain control of their body, though it doesn't seem possible for them to just will the demon out. There are a few different versions of exorcisms in the show. Most of them are in Latin, and they need to be spoken with a certain level of accuracy in order to work. There are some beings who have an innate ability to force demons out of people's body, notably Lilith, the half-demon Jesse Turner, and Sam when he was powered up with demon blood. There are also ways to do the opposite of an exorcism and force a demon to stay inside a body. They usually involve carving symbols into their vessel or tying them up with engraved leather straps. There's also a spell that can be placed over an entire building that locks demons inside their meat suits while on the premises. Also, if a demon is trying to escape and you don't want them to do that, you can just say exorcisms backwards and that'll somehow force them back into their body. I don't really know how that works, but they did it one time, so I don't know. The last thing I want to cover for demonic possession is some of the crazier feats we saw. In Season 2, Azazel possessed a Reaper, which is really crazy for a few reasons. Firstly, the Reaper in question wasn't really on the physical plane. She was on the astral plane between life and death, like a ghost. Also, it's not super clear if Reapers possess people or if they can materialize a body, but if they're inside a vessel, then this would mark the first time that a single body held 3 different beings. The second would come in Season 9, when Sam was simultaneously possessed by the angel Gadriel and the demon Crowley. Later in the series, Crowley becomes the only demon to possess something other than a human when he temporarily jumps into a mouse in order to escape death. It's never revealed whether or not demons can possess monsters, but I'm going to guess that they can't, since otherwise it would probably be a lot easier for Crowley to just jump inside monsters to find purgatory rather than torture them. Alright, let's move on to the second most common type of possession, and the one that'll definitely take up most of this video, angelic possession. Like demons, angels can't manifest physically on Earth, so they need to find some poor schlub to jump inside if they want to walk around with humanity. When they come down to Earth, their angelic form can take a couple of different shapes. The first is a ray of blinding light that can just kind of beam itself into a vessel. Later in the series, they start appearing as wisps of blue or white smoke that enter a vessel through the mouth, just like demons. That's not the only trait that they share with demons, as angels also inhabit every single cell of their vessels. However, that's where the similarities pretty much end. There are plenty of differences between angels and demons, but one of the biggest relates to their ability to possess people. Demons can pretty much jump into anyone anytime they want. However, angels actually have a bunch of rules that limit who they can possess and when. And we'll start with the who. Each individual angel is only compatible with certain humans, and if one tries to hijack a body that they don't gel with, it'll violently explode. If an angel needs to go to Earth for a while, then they probably want to find a perfect vessel, which can contain them forever without issues. The ability to be a perfect vessel for a specific angel runs in families. For example, both Jimmy Novak and his daughter Claire worked as perfect vessels for Castiel. It's implied that one of the reasons Cupids exist is to make sure that these bloodlines continue, so that at least some angels can come to Earth anytime they need to. One thing that's kind of interesting is that it seems like most angels either don't know who their perfect vessels are, or they just don't have one. It's not clear how they get that information, but we do know that one test that can determine if someone has potential to be a vessel is communication. Angels are able to talk while outside their vessel, though most humans only perceive this as a high-pitched whine. However, some people can actually understand this angelic speech, and it seems like most of the time these people work as vessels, though not all vessels have this ability. If an angel can't find a perfect vessel, they do have another option. See, angelic compatibility isn't a binary yes or no, there is a middle ground, as we see several angels take temporary vessels that last a little while, but will eventually burn out. So let's say an angel comes to Earth and manages to find their perfect vessel. Good to go, right? Well, not quite yet. In addition to compatibility, angels need one more thing before they can use someone's body: consent. They need to get permission from the current occupant in order to pilot their body. This is usually given by answering yes to some variation of the question, "Can I possess you?" The answer has to be given verbally, but the question doesn't necessarily. I don't believe that Lucifer ever actually asked Sam to let him in, yet when he eventually said yes, it counts because Sam knew what he was saying yes to. This shows that prospective hosts need to be at least a little cognizant of what they're agreeing to, though that doesn't mean that trickery can't be involved. When Gadriel asked Sam to possess him, he was incredibly vague about what he was asking, and he was also disguised as Dean, further obscuring his intentions. This isn't the only shady tactic they can use. Permission granted under duress still counts for angels, so they can threaten, beat, even torture someone into compliance. So yeah, that's really awful, but there is one more rule that works in humanity's favor. See, just like in the real world with humans, consent to be inside someone can be revoked at any time for any reason, and if they say get out, you gotta get out. Angels are physically compelled to leave a vessel if permission is revoked, and they need to get a second yes if they want to get back in. There are a few exceptions to this rule, the first being archangels. Despite being some of the most powerful beings in the show, archangels are still bound by most of the rules that govern their weaker siblings, including the need for consent. However, if they're given permission once, they never need it again, and they can't be expelled by revoking it. The other exception is Castiel, though he's a really weird case. In the season 4 finale, Raphael explodes Jimmy's body, killing both him and Cass. God puts his body back together and resurrects Cass inside it. However, Jimmy's soul remains in heaven, meaning that for the rest of the series, Cass is walking around in a dead guy's meat suit. I'm pretty sure this is the only time an angel is able to take over a corpse. It's explicitly stated in season 5 that Sam and Dean need to be alive in order for the archangels to wear them. Cass is even able to give consent for other angels to share his vessel, so I guess it's truly his body after that point. Besides revoking consent, there are only a few ways to undo angelic possession. The British men of letters invented a device called the hyperbolic pulse generator, which can force angels and even archangels out of a body by repeatedly blasting it with pulses of energy. And that's kind of it. At least it's really the only way that humans can exercise regular angels. Archangels have another trick available to them, that being the Archangel Blade. When this thing is used by an archangel, it can kill an angel while leaving the host body alive. We only ever see this used against another archangel, so we technically don't know if it would work against lower angels, and again, it has to be used by an archangel in order for it to work. Finally, the demon Alistair knew a few different chants, and one of them could allegedly send angels back to heaven. Many people assume that that works as an exorcism, however, we don't actually get to see what it did, so who knows for sure. I'll put it here, but just know that we don't actually know if it's an exorcism. Alright, now into the various forms of monster possession, and we'll start with the very first monsters, the Leviathans. These things probably had a regular physical form in the past, but by 2011, they'd been reduced to amorphous blobs of black goo that need to hijack people in order to do stuff. They do this through physical contact. If a person so much as touches this ooze, then a Levi will download into them and take over. Leviathan possession is very different from what we've discussed so far. They don't just take over a body, they completely alter it. They may look human, but they most certainly are not. They bleed black goo, and they can shapeshift into anyone that they've ever touched. If they get hungry, then they can unhinge their jaws and reveal a huge mouth filled with jagged teeth. It's really crazy. There's no known way to undo this kind of possession. Once they get into you, they're got you for good. Another thing that makes this type of possession unique is that Levi's don't tend to jump bodies. Once they get into someone, they usually stay there permanently. The only time we ever see a Leviathan leave a body is when they all burst out of cast at the beginning of Season 7, but that's a special case since there were, well, all of them inside of one vessel. It's not clear if Levi's even can normally leave a vessel that they've taken over, but honestly, they don't really have a need to since they can become anyone they want. It's also unclear if the host's soul remains inside after their body has been possessed. When Cass was taken over, the Leviathans claimed that he was gone, and honestly, let's hope that that's the case. Otherwise, this little girl had to watch her body turn into an older man, eat a bunch of people, and then eat itself. Alright, let's talk about Eve next, the mother of monsters. When she first returned to Earth, Eve took over the body of a young woman, though it happened off screen, so we didn't get to see how she got in or what she looked like beforehand. Eve is related to the Leviathans somehow, and there are similarities between their forms of possession. Eve also physically changes her vessel. We didn't see her unhinge her jaw, but she does produce eggs, and while dying, she oozed blackish fluid. Because of that, it's probably not possible to exorcise Eve once she's inside someone, though we don't know that for certain. Actually, we don't know a lot of things about Eve. She was only in like 3 episodes, so that's pretty much all I have to say about her. The next form of monster possession comes from the smallest monster in the series, the the conworm. This little bugger is unique for a few reasons. Firstly, it has a solid physical body on Earth. Not just a coherent form, an actual living body. As such, conworm's form of possession isn't spiritual in any way. It's an entirely material process. The worm crawls inside a person's ear, and I guess plugs into their brain somehow. That part isn't really clear. Because this isn't a spiritual process, the worm can't be forced out with fancy words, though there probably was magic that could have worked, but we didn't see that. The only effective method for removing a conworm was to force it out with pain. That sounds easy enough, but it's really not. After all, what hurts the body doesn't necessarily hurt the worm itself, and it can keep piloting someone even after fatal injuries. However, the worm is susceptible to electricity, so if you shock its vessel enough, it'll crawl out in order to survive. When it exits a body, it leaves behind a trail of, wow, more black goo. Although this stuff was a slight greenish tinge to it, so there's that, I guess. There was a second species of conworm that operated a little differently, but it didn't really possess its victims so much as it infected them. Okay, enough monsters. Let's move on to ghost possession. Also, just a heads up, the visuals for this section include a major spoiler for Season 7. If you don't want to see that, then just skip ahead. I'll put a timecode on the screen. In Supernatural, ghosts come in a variety of shapes and natures, and they have a bunch of different powers. Some can possess people, but honestly, that's kind of rare. Despite ghosts being one of the most common creatures in the series, only a handful of them jump into living people. I mean, why do that when you can just take the form of a racist truck? Yes, that's a real thing that happens in the show. When ghosts do decide to take over people, they do it in a few different ways. Ghosts can't just wander wherever they want. Most of the time, they're tied to a specific place or even item, and so if they want a meat suit, they gotta wait until someone comes to them. The most common way for ghosts to enter a body is to just kind of walk into them, but there are other ways. Some ghosts are tied to specific objects and can manifest inside someone if they interact with it. For example, one of the weirder ghosts in the show was tied to a bunch of costumes and would take over people who were wearing them. Hell, there was even a few ghosts that could possess inanimate objects like mannequins and action figures. Once they have a vessel, most ghosts are able to travel quite a ways from their haunt. For example, one ghost haunted a school bus, but could actually enter the school itself while inside a body. Also, that particular spirit would leave behind a substance called ectoplasm, which looks like, you guessed it, black goo. I do not know what the obsession with black goo is. I have to stress that all of the different forms of black goo that I've mentioned so far are all supposed to be different things. Anyway, there are a few different ways to force ghosts out of a body, the easiest being to just destroy their earthly tether by burning it. This not only ends the possession, but also gets the spirit off of Earth for good. Sometimes a ghost can be forced out of a body by putting a bunch of salt into their mouth, which is weird, but hey, it works. If the possession is tied to a specific object, then it can sometimes be undone by just getting the object away from the body. Finally, there was one example of a ghost being ejected from a body when they just accidentally touched iron. Now, you'd think that would be an easy solution, but unfortunately, it seems like that doesn't always work, since other episodes show ghosts being burned or bound by iron without getting kicked out of their vessel. Alright, before we move on to the last and absolute worst form of possession in the show, there's a few that I want to just fly through real quick because there's not much to say about them. First, Eleanor Visiak. She was a monster from Purgatory that was summoned by H.P. Lovecraft. On Earth, her true form was invisible, and she needed a body in order to do stuff. We don't know how she entered the body, if her host was still alive, or if it was possible to get her out. The only notable thing about her was that according to her host's son, she smelled different than his mother, so there's that. Next, the Soul Eater. It was a creature from another dimension that would suck out people's souls and trap them in its home dimension. It would jump into the body of someone that it had trapped, and their eyes and voice would change. It could be killed by drawing a specific symbol in the real world and its dimension, and that's the only known way to exorcise it. Finally, we have Yokoth, an alien monster from another universe. She took over the body of a woman named Sandy by latching a tentacle onto her mouth and transferring her essence or something into her. On Earth, she can make her eyes glow purple, and she can also shoot out a tentacle from her mouth. There's at least one other creature like Yokoth, that being her mate Glithur, who can apparently possess people in the same way. This form of possession is seemingly incurable. Okay, to wrap things up, let's discuss the absolute, and I mean absolute, worst form of possession in Supernatural, and it doesn't come from demons, tentacle monsters, or even Satan himself. No, this nightmare is brought to you by a creature called Basan. Basan are bug, spirit, monster things. Honestly, we don't really know what they are because we don't get a good look at one outside of a vessel. All we know is that they crawl into people through the mouth, and once they take over the body, it gains green eyes, pale skin, and sharp teeth. There is one other feature that we need to discuss, but I'll get back to that in a minute. Anyway, unlike most possessors, Basan don't seem to use humans as all-purpose meat suits. Instead, they use their vessels for a very specific purpose. See, Basan can't reproduce in their natural form. They need to use people as vectors, and by that I mean they literally jump into humans in order to bang each other. After the hookup, Basan only have a few days to live before dying off and taking their poor sex suit with them. Yet while other body snatchers can keep their vessels going for thousands of years, these bugs actually shorten the lifespan of whoever they take over. There's no known way to undo this type of possession, and honestly, that's probably for the best. See, at some point after being hijacked, the host body changes in a very terrible way. Their genitals disappear. And I don't mean fall off, I mean the one person who saw something like this said that there was nothing there. So yeah, even if you're not into sexy time, good luck using the toilet after that. I think you can understand why I consider this to be the absolute worst form of possession in the show. There's literally nothing even tangentially positive about the experience. And that, I believe, pretty much covers all the different forms of possession that can occur in Supernatural. I probably missed at least one, but I feel that's understandable when you're covering a series with over 300 episodes. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm sorry for any audio issues. My mic is having a bunch of problems, and it made recording this video extremely frustrating. If you're new to the channel, then welcome. I hope you stick around for a while. I don't really have a set schedule for uploads. I just try to get out videos when I have the time. I'll have more for you soon enough, but for now, carry on.